I'm Joel West, and I'll be our moderator today. So let's go ahead and go to our program. Figure out how to flip the slides. There we go. Okay, so what are we going to do in cover this morning is we'll have an overview. We'll talk about the process. So our guest speaker today is Father Kevin Craik. He's a serial church planter. In entrepreneurship, we might call him a chronic church planter. He keeps doing it, and hopefully maybe this is the last one, but who knows? And anyway, he'll be talking about his own experience and what he's learned over the years as a church planter. And I've been kind of a person involved in organizing efforts to support church planters, but am not a church planter myself, although we do hope that we will have a church plant here in Oceanside sometime in the next few years. Okay, so what are we hoping to accomplish today? We want to provide an overview of the church planting process, give people sort of the key language and terms that are used and kind of ways to think about the process and the milestones and so on. We want to really kind of, if we have any single goal today, it would be to help people who are interested in church planting to think about what they need to do next and how to prioritize it. And, you know, to adapt the typology of a former defense secretary, we want to move from the unknown unknowns to the known unknowns. We want to basically help people understand what it is they need to know to be a church planter. There's no way that a brief webinar can make people into a church planter, but maybe it'll help you understand what you would have to accomplish or your team would have to accomplish in order to be able to be ready. And then we have two, you know, obviously we're talking about specifically what's relevant to continuing churches for planning a new continuing church. Then continuing forward, we're trying to identify those who are interested in this and to start a conversation with these people to be able to better support them. So one of the things I just wanted to start, when you look at discussions of church planting and process and whatnot, sometimes it kind of gets wrapped around the axle about the order things happen. And the reality is there are at least 3 or 4 different ways that a church can kind of get started or a nucleus can be formed to launch a church. And one is sometimes referred to as a parachute plant. A priest is sent to a location that he doesn't know, and he has to find people who are interested in the church and you know, integrate with the community. And then in the case of a loyal remnant, you might have people who are already there and want a church in their location, and so they want to. They may be meeting without a worship, you know, non-sacramental worship for a while, and they obviously need to find a way to get a priest. And then in some cases, you may have a nucleus of people from an existing church that move on to go to form a daughter church of some way, say, you know, 30 miles down the road in an area where there is a need for a new church. And in any way, where all of this leads is you need a nucleus of people, both clergymen and laity, that are the initial core team that are going to launch the church. And we're kind of here, we're ruling out this idea of a replant, which was very common in ACNA, of you have a bunch of people who are in one denomination and you pick them up and move them to another building, but it's roughly the same team. So just really, before you plant a church, there's some really core ideas that have to be answered, which is, you know, first off, why are you planting a church? The continuing movement is plagued by people whose definition of a church is one that meets my needs, and who cares if we attract anyone else?
Right.
And that's not a good reason to plant a church. If you don't want to drive an extra 20 minutes to go to church, that's not a reason in itself that the world needs another Anglican church. And that kind of brings to the flip side, which is who is it you're called to serve? Who is it you hope to reach? Who is it you think would benefit from this church existing? And then what sort of church are you trying to create? And then, as a business guy, what's your end goal? What does it take for you what are you going to have to do to make this succeed? And really, before you get anywhere down the road, you have to talk, the priests, the laity, the diocese, and other financial sponsors have to all kind of be on the same page of what is it you're trying to do. And then the other is, where are you going to plant? And among the criteria that might be considered is it a good location for an Anglican church? For example, are you far enough away with enough people in your community to support a church that's at least, half an hour away, say, from any existing similar church? But then the other thing that you have to think about is how well suited is it to what you particularly are able to plant? Do you have existing people on the ground who know that community? Do you understand that mission field? Is the clergyman that you have available, is this somebody who would be well suited to this community? So, for example, if it's an urban setting, is this somebody who understands young urban dwellers as opposed to, say, a suburban or rural context? And then, if you're getting help from sponsors, is this an area where they can help you, or are you kind of on your own? And then what are you trying to do? This is sort of a back of the envelope sketch of, what is it you hope to have on Sunday mornings, say, when you launch? What is you hoping to offer to people who come in to meet you? And obviously, in this crowd, 28 prayer book, suitable altar and vesture. You can't offer a sacramental service without ordained clergy, so you need to have somebody available to celebrate every week. And then, there are other things that would normally be considered part of a healthy church. Music, children and nursery programs, other ministries, whether to meet the needs of those in the church or those outside the church. And, are you going to, down the road, where are you going to meet? You may have temporary quarters, but in the long run, what is it you hope to accomplish in terms of a permanent location? So with that, I want to turn over to Father Kevin, who kind of talk about the core of what it takes to launch a church, and from his own experience and what he's learned over the years.
Thanks, Joel. I just wanted to reiterate, I guess, reemphasize the point that you're making about the importance, I think, of the vision, and then also within there, the values that are shared amongst the community. I think that's something that from a very, very early point in time, the quicker that you have an initial group who can come together around this shared vision, the better. I feel like it's the vision and the sense of vocation to the thing, that's what's needed to get you through all of the difficult things that lie ahead, because it's a very difficult and challenging process. And so if there's not coherence, if you don't have the priest who's able to cast the vision, and then people then who also share the conviction of that vision and the values of the church that you're wanting to create, what you need in that initial, with that initial vision, is you need people who are willing to, in the moment, that is today, and embody that vision of who they want to be in the future. And if you don't have that kind of group, I just don't think it's going to go very well. So just wanted to reiterate that. So getting to this slide here, then speaking about kind of who might be the one, or the type of person who might be called to do this. Again, I think that's the place to start. You have to have a priest ultimately, or an individual who feels called to it. It's the calling to it, like I said, to reiterate, that's going to get you through the difficulty of the process. So you have to have that initial priest, or someone who's on the way, who really feels called to do it in their heart. It seems to me that there has to be some sort of pastoral or teaching gifts. And maybe that seems so patently obvious that it doesn't need to be stated, but I've seen in so many contexts where it seems like that does need to be stated. That you have to have someone who, and when I talk about kind of pastoral gifts, it's listed here, kind of a heart for mission, ability to connect with new people, and then again the ability to cast and lead people into a vision. Since you have to have someone again who has this exterior oriented mentality, someone who can think through very clearly what is it that we want to do here, and why is it that, how is it that we're going to be able to serve others with this place. Who's always kind of pursuing people and always looking outside of himself then to the people that he can reach. Again, I think it's important to state that not every Christian has this particular gift. Not every Christian has this particular evangelical gift. And this evangelical gift will look different according to the personality of the priest. It's not that it has to be, the gregarious extrovert who just loves talking to people all the time. I don't find myself to be that person. But nonetheless, in their own way, according to their own giftings and personality, that priest, the person who's considering planting a church, has to be someone who has a heart then to reach other people. So again, the ability then to communicate a convincing vision for the future, this has to start with the priest's own vision. And I think that it's not like we're creating some kind of, I think we want to avoid the kind of mentality for a church planting pastor who just kind of looks for group consensus amongst the initial group. A kind of democratic process, let's say. Certainly the priest should listen to and take into consideration, but I think the priest himself needs to spend his own time in prayer and discernment to be able to get to a place where he has a particular vision that he's able to guide and lead people into. Again, humble about it, taking in consideration, but the point is that the priest himself has to have an idea and a sense of calling of where God is leading them and what God is wanting them to do with this church plan. High tolerance of risk and ambiguity, perseverance in face of setbacks. Church planting's hard. It's something where there's lots of unknowns all the time. There's lots of nights where you wonder, how in the world is this going to happen? How in the world are we going to be able to get whatever it might be, the place, the finances, the people, the resources. It's just a priest has to be able to tolerate that sort of risk, that sort of ambiguity, has to be able to persevere through that. I think it's really important at this point too to say, in this regard, priests can't be Superman. I feel like I'm not that way. And we need to find ways initially then to have kind of means in place then to take care of these pastors who are leading new church plants because it can be such a difficult task. So I have to say, if just by personality, ambiguity and those sorts of things are difficult for you, it might not be the thing that you're being called to, but at the same time, you can't be expected to do it all by yourself. And I think we need to have means in place and resources in place to help and support new church planters. There are surveys that can be used here to kind of assess these traits. I've seen actually quite a few of these. So that's good. And those can be helpful resources as just a part of the discernment for it. So yeah, you can go on to the next one, Bill. So speaking then about and sorry, Joel, we're saving all questions to the end, right?
Yes, we are.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so then speaking kind of roughly about the launch process, I think it's helpful to say here that we should think of these things as general principles and guidelines, but there is no perfect church planting manual that if you just follow steps A, B, and C, it's going to work out for you. That's important to say. Every single context is different. The contexts that I've been in have been drastically different. And the context that I've seen a lot of church planters in have all been very, very different. But it seems like kind of collating it all together, there's some common things that kind of are there, which is what we see here as part of this slide is speaking about the launch process. So again, as we said, there has to be a kind of gathering of a core group or a nucleus. Again, this could be just the core group without a priest or just the priest starting himself. It could go either way. It seems to me that if you are a potential church planner and you're feeling called to this should be your kind of the first thing that you're praying for, that you're praying and fasting for a group of maybe 3 or 4 other adults who will come into this and kind of help share that vision and support you with that. And then from there, that core group will hopefully continue to grow. But that's the initial thing. You have to gather those 3 or 4 people around you. It's important to say too here about the core group is that I think the core group has to be, okay. So I'll go back to that. So we can go back to that and I'll come back to that point. So then fundraising, is just a reality. There has to be funds. I found in my process that usually funds come from, different places, but fundraising, it has to be there. If it's from the diocese, if it's from just loyal supporters, it's from the core group, funds just have to be there. You have to be able to then identify resources needed to go live. That's kind of self-explanatory. Attract critical mass to go live, and then you launch from there. So again, the rough process, and we'll go through it some more here. So building and forming a core group. This is where some of the church planting language, I had this experience before in ACNA. That's not to say that everyone's this way in ACNA. I don't think we can say categorically ACNA is bad in this regard. I learned a lot from them. But this is where I do think we run into some tension here between, just kind of like you're starting a business sort of a thing and forgetting that in the process of this, it's like we're actually caring for people and pastoring and leading people into a closer relationship with our Lord. And there's a tension here that I think every church planter through his own prayer has to work out. It's to the point where I've even read church planting books that says that the church planting pastor should not pastor the core group, meaning he should just see them kind of functionally and pragmatically as a group's going to help him launch, but he shouldn't waste kind of his time and his resources pastoring that group. I disagree with that. I think right away with the priest, it starts with the priest and then with a few people that hopefully he's able to gather around himself. They have to be committed then to their own prayer and their own growth in Christ. They have to be committed then to their own spiritual formation, because it's that growth in the Lord that's going to then be attractive then to other people. Because you get this idea of, it's like, okay, well, what, especially when you're not a church yet, when you don't have regular Sunday services, what is it that you're inviting people to? What's the compelling thing then that would be the reason why anyone would come? And it seems like the reason for that, or the only compelling thing is then that people come to your group and they recognize, okay, something's going on here. And I think that something is that growth of that group and the commitment then to their own spiritual life and formation. That's the thing that's going to be the attractive and compelling thing initially. So again, this comes back to the priest's ability to lead people in this. This comes back to the priest's pastoral and directive gifts in order to help people in this process, and has to be committed to that. The balance here then is the balance between keeping that kind of commitment to the group's spiritual formation, keeping that externally oriented, where it can fall, and it could easily devolve into a sort of small group that just serves its own needs, which is fine if that's what actually God's will for it is. But this is kind of the tension that we have to be committed to our own growth internally, but we have to, it's not automatic. Us being committed to our own growth won't automatically then lead to us being having a mission kind of minded orientation. So I think the priest needs to be continually challenging people. How is it that we can use our gifts and the growth that we're experiencing in this group? How can we use that then to reach out beyond ourselves? So yeah, I think that's good for now. So yeah, belief in shared vision, adopt shared values. I've spoken to that, so I think we can move on to the next slide here. So fundraising, as said, you just need to be able to do it. I think I don't see myself as someone who is particularly gifted in fundraising, though I can do okay with it sometimes. And yeah, so like in my initial context, when I church planted it was an African church plant in the Pacific Northwest, was able to secure a combination of diocesan funds from other churches actually that just wanted to support us, as well as then funds from sort of personal network of family, friends, people who kind of believed in me and wanted to support my ministry and the work that I was doing. So again, those are just some sources for funds. I think it's important for the core group then to be, including the priest, obviously, to start giving to the thing right away. And that can be a source of funds, but that's not going to be able to cover everything. That's part of it. I think that's part of the discipleship of the group that needs to be present. But all this to say that the church planter has to be able to spend some time, have some gifting, and spend time in prayer, asking God how he's going to be able to locate some funds. So yeah, we can talk more about that later if there are questions. So yeah, resources needed to launch. I have here at the end this kind of principle, and I think this serves for churches too that are already established, or even us now when we're kind of in a mission stage trying to become a parish. Do it well or do it later. I would rather a church have no music and have a spoken mass than have crappy music at the mass. I'd rather there be no children's ministry than a really, really poorly led children's ministry led by grumpy volunteers who don't want to be there. Again, you get the point. I think with this, we need to have patience. We need to be able to pray and persevere in our prayer and God's provision for us. And wait until we get to that point that we can do something in a sustainable way that's not going to crush and destroy the bandwidth of our core members. And we can wait only until we get to that point to actually do something. If not, just wait, keep praying about it, but make sure you start in a way, whatever it is that you're starting, you start in a way that's sustainable. Taking into consideration, I think, primarily then the bandwidth and the energy of your core group. You don't want to burn them out. So we have here, kind of materials necessary. These are everything that you might think of for a Sunday morning: vesture, furnishing an altar, liturgical volunteers, hospitality, children's ministry, nursery, music, all of these sorts of things. Pretty much everything that you can think of. But again, the point is, wait until you have it all in place and you can do it well, and don't rush the process. So picking a location, it seems like, this is a difficult one. It has to be one that's guided by prayer. Seems like in my context, what I've seen, there's two primary options: either rent some sort of commercial space. This has, in a way, can be more expensive. You have to furnish the space. It can be kind of hard in our context. So I've seen it done well. to set up a worship space that's reverent and sacred in the midst, in an industrial building or something like that. The benefit here is that even though, it might not be a pretty building from the outside, it's likely that maybe you would be able to get to a place, or you would have a spot that you can just have everything set up. This is also something that just is kind of like forewarned. Church planters have to do church in a box for years and years and years. And by church in a box, I mean everything comes in boxes. You have to set up everything beforehand. You have to tear down everything afterwards. Oftentimes, that's just the reality, which speaks to, kind of one of the resources needed on the previous slide of having enough people on a dedicated setup and tear down team. Don't take that for granted, and don't just continue to ask people who don't want to do it, because you will wear them out very, very quickly in that process of just setting up and tearing down. The other option then is, using another church, but, you might be stuck here in terms of your hours. When I was in Washington, we had to meet on Saturday nights, but we were able to meet in a church building. But it's just something you have to consider and look and see what's available. Several moves likely until you own your own building. I've never gotten to that point. So hopefully that will come sometime, but All right, so attracting critical mass. So this is the process of going from a core group of priests and 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 adults, something like that, who have a shared vision, shared commitment to that vision, shared commitment then to their own growth, both individually and as a community. The process from there then to actually getting to the place where you can start Sunday morning or Saturday evening church, whatever that might be. I just have to say, humility requires us to say, in a lot of these cases, you just don't know how this happens. This is where we have to avoid it's kind of here to overcome conflicting motives. We can't treat people as targets for our evangelism practices, or we can't treat people as simply people that we want to, fill in the seat for us so we can say that we have a church, or we can get to a point where we can launch a church so we can say that we have it. This is really hard. We have to be able to still, for as much as, we might feel like God is calling us to plant a church, and for as much as we have that desire in our heart, when we meet somebody, again, we can't just see them through that eyes. It's like, oh, this person's a potential member of this church that I'm wanting to start. But I say that recognizing, I'm not saying I do it perfectly. We just have to, I think the priest just has to be mindful of this, and the core group too has to be mindful of this, that at the end of the day, when we interact with somebody and we invite them to come, for example, we're doing this because we sincerely want what's best for them, and we sincerely love them, and we sincerely care about them, which might at times lead you to say to somebody, I don't think that this church plant that we're working on, maybe this isn't right for you. Maybe I can help you find another church. There are a lot of people who I think that's maybe an important thing to state, that there's a lot of people, and you'll find this a lot, the let me know once you're already up and going sort of people. And that's okay. We shouldn't judge people for that. I think it's a particular call, someone who wants to be part of building something, someone who wants to be in the initial stages. It's a particular call, and not everybody has that call, and not everybody has that gifting. So again, in the beginning, it would be better for you to tell somebody that, hey, maybe you should wait until we actually do launch, because, again, you have to find the pastoral ways to say this. But the point is you don't want somebody who doesn't have a call to the thing, who's not gifted in helping you guys do that, someone who's just going to make it more difficult. You don't want them part of your group initially. So you can lovingly, and I did this before, I say, hey, we're probably going to get going in 6 to 8 months. Maybe you should come back and visit us when we're at that point. Um, so yeah, so all that to say, I think this process is a process that has to be guided by prayer. It has to be guided by, again, a genuine heart and concern for others. Um, and I think that, again, the priest and this initial core group has to be a group that has a certain kind of evangelical call. Um, Again, that might look different for everybody in that group according to personality and gifting. But I think it's important to gather people around you, at least initially in this core group, who all feel a certain shared responsibility here and a certain shared call, so that they might be doing it in their own ways, again, according to their personality, but all have this sense of like, yeah, we need to go out and reach the community. We need to go and be evangelistic here in doing that. And then, this is what I've said here, in the end, I think this is in God's hands. I think this is the best that we can do. We have a core group, priest and core group, who are committed to their own growth, who have a heart then for the other, the person who's outside of the community, and all feel called then, according to their own gifts, to go and reach out to those around them, to reach outside of themselves. I think that's the best that we can do, and I think that's the goal that we're praying towards. And at that point, then that's kind of like, you're planting the seeds, but God's the one ultimately who gives the growth. And it just seems like there is no formula for this other than that underlying sense of gifting and call. So, yeah. So, yeah, some of this is, repeat, never launch before you're ready. You have to have all things in place: location, funding, committed group, credible plan for the next few years. Once you launch, you're committed. Launching is the start line, not the finish line. I think that's really important. A lot of times the priest, and this all comes down to the priest's ability to communicate this vision and share this with the group as well. Especially if it's been a little bit of a delayed process, there can be this sense in the group of like, oh, we finally got here. We launched Sunday morning services. But we all need to be reminded that this is only the beginning. And I think we have to recognize this, and so be able to launch with a certain idea in mind, a certain plan in mind of, okay, what's then the next couple years going to look like? If you just launch on one Sunday and have no idea what's going to happen the next Sunday, maybe that's something then that maybe that's an indication that we need to wait. I think, that's probably an indication that we need to wait. I think it's probably helpful. There's no fixed rule here, but I think launching maybe with a 2-year plan in place is good. So that includes where you're going to meet for the 2 years, who's going to be the people helping you for the 2 years, more or less have 2 years worth of finances secured and in place, or at least close to that. I would say, maybe a bare minimum of a 2-year plan once you launch. And if you haven't gotten that, then you probably need to wait to launch. So.
Thank you, Father Kevin. I will just close up with a couple of slides, and then we'll go to questions. So if you have questions, you could just type them in the chat, and we'll call on you and try to group the questions around related topics. So really, just a couple of key ideas, which is there's a lot that can be done to support church plant and church planters. But in the end, nobody else can do the job. This is not like you can call up Target or McDonald's or whatever and say, I'd like to have a location in my community. Would you please set one up for us, please? The church gets planted because, as Father Kevin said, there's a core group, a priest and a core group of laity who really feel called to do it. However, those outside of that process, those not in the field in the particular location, can do things to help improve the odds. The number one requirement in our ecclesiology is the diocese has to be on board. The bishop has to be supportive. Some cases the bishop can be very involved or provide a lot of resources. Other cases The bishop is providing moral support and encouragement and sending others in the planter's direction. But in any event, from a practical standpoint, you can't plant in a parish without having your bishop behind you. But the other thing is that oftentimes the greatest help comes from another church, and this could be a mother church, whether it be the church that your parishioners came from, or it could be another church that is taking you on as a project. Or I've seen examples where your landlord, you're meeting in, for example, a lot of Anglican churches have in the last 10 years or so partnered with local Missouri Synod churches, because those are kind of the Lutherans who are most compatible with what we're trying to do. And oftentimes they can provide additional resources or tips or introductions or things like that to kind of help you deal with this whole problem of going from having nothing, to being able to offer a service every Sunday morning, 52 weeks a year. So in terms of what can be done to help planters, I've looked at what ACNA is doing and others, REC. There are really sort of 5 things that are important. And the first is to articulate why church planting is essential. Because you talk to church planters out there, Father Kevin mentioned the doubts, the anxieties, the stresses, the risk of burnout by the planter. You need to have a sense from the overall organization that the organization believes in what you're doing, this high-risk activity that hopefully will have a high reward. The next is that whether it's the mother church or whether it's a diocese, if you say you're going to support a church plant, well, what does that mean? How are you going to decide who to support? What kind of what policies do you have to give money? Can you provide people? Can you provide supply clergy? Can you provide musicians to come if they're meeting on a Sunday night or a Saturday night? So what is it that you will do, and how will you go about doing it, so that the church planter knows what to expect and what he can count on? ACNA and REC have well-developed resources, as do the Baptists and many others, for training people, teams, for launching churches, written materials, and so on. Fourth, I think, has been underestimated. Father Kevin alluded to this. You need something to support the planter, and that could be what I have a higher ed background. This could be peer mentors. You have people who are similarly situated, and you have a kind of a rap session once a month to compare notes. Or it could be somebody who's more experienced, who's mentoring you and giving you advice like a mentor would in any other clerical or secular vocation. And then finally, it's important that church planting really be seen consistently as being important, both across the G3 and within an individual diocese, because people are not going to put themselves out there. Donors are not going to donate. Laity are not going to volunteer unless there is a very clear message that this is something that we value, and we show that we value. And so realistically, continuing forward as a small volunteer group, trying to serve all 3 provinces and hopefully someday others as well. And what we can do is we can provide a small number of workshops every year, point you to resources, maybe develop resources, try to organize some support networks for planters, people who are planting and interested in planting. And we're also going to try to do what we can to support the idea of a church planting culture in the G3. But it's really going to have to be done on the ground with the bishops and the local clergy in terms of individual dioceses. So last slide. What is continuing forward to help to do going forward? We would like to do an in-person church planting workshop, assuming there's enough interest. And we would want to target people either in a plant or considering a plant. And looking at where the interest has been so far, it's probably going to be in the southeast somewhere, because that seems to be where the sort of the nucleus of Anglicanism, continuing Anglicanism, and people are. So somewhere, say, between Georgia and Florida. diocesan conversation. So if you're trying to develop a diocesan policy, we'd like to help in any way we can. And then also, as we've discussed in continuing forward, there are a lot of things that span both existing small churches and prospective churches that might be of interest. Getting a website up and running, creating ministries that serve your community. So there are some things that we're gonna talk about in terms of whether there's some events that would apply both to people who have a church that's trying to strengthen their presence and somebody who's trying to build a church from scratch. But in any event, we welcome your suggestions, and we're going to have a survey in the chat, and we'll also be emailing it out. So with that, I'll go ahead and stop sharing and go ahead and call in some questions. So Father Matt, do you want to go ahead and ask your first question?
The core group for his church plant? Was it more of a mother-daughter situation, pulling people from St. Matthew's or other places? I think that this is it's an important question, because really this is the initialization of, the mission to plant a church. So it's, I think it's an important thing to bring up so that that information could be propagated to other people. It's kind of key.
Father, sorry, I didn't hear the first part of what you said. Could you repeat it?
Sourcing the core group for your church plant. So
gotcha.
You started with a small group of people. Where did they come from? So oftentimes what ends up happening is there's a mother-daughter relationship where some people hive off from the mother church and begin a daughter church. I'm wondering what you did with yours, if that was the case, or if you did something else, or if you're aware of other strategies that would be helpful for other church planters.
Yeah, so it was somewhat different, but somewhat similar. My first plant in Washington, there was a group of, so it was me and my family, and then there was a husband and wife who were part of an Anglican church that was about 35 minutes away or so. So again, we kind of were partnering with that church, and they had said that they wanted to be part of that. And then we just kind of coincidentally had some friends who literally, we told them that we were moving to Washington to plant a church, and they said, "Oh, we're moving to Washington too." So it was definitely like a God thing. So then they were part of that initial core group. And then here at St. Thomas, this was more, okay, there was a group of, a certain number of people from St. Matthew's that were kind of part of it. And so, I guess the sourcing from that does come from a church that you're kind of in relationship with. I think your point is good, and I think about it a lot. And honestly, I don't know the answer to it. I think this is the hardest part. And so beyond the individual kind of, again, seeking maybe relationships with different churches or with people in the diocese, their own kind of network of people that they know who might be interested in the work too. But again, it seems like this is really just like, and then the initial thing then that the priest or the individual wanting to plant a church has to be committed to pray and fast for and see where God is leading in this area. Because it seems to be that, at least in my experience, that the sourcing of the core group comes from those kinds of things. But again, it just seems like it's led by God.
Yeah.
So, don't know if that's helpful.
Well, of course it is. Of course it is. I think especially, talking about prayer and fasting, it's really easy to kind of rely. Oftentimes when a pastor is sort of airdropped, and maybe he has his own family, it's very, especially if you're younger, it's easy to default to social media or advertising, and you may attract some people, but the question is, are they the right people? So I just appreciate the comments about prayer and fasting. I think that's really solid.
Yeah, and I think you're right, Father, too. That's a good thing. I think I alluded to this, but just because there are people, that doesn't mean that they're the right people for the initial group. I think we need to be discerning with it. And you're right. You'll notice I didn't say anything about social media. Uh, I'm a millennial who hates social media. I got rid of it all myself one Lent, and I remember when I went up to Washington, there was this priest at this church that we were kind of partnering with. He kind of got on my case, like, you can't be a church planner and not be on social media. So I capitulated and I gave in, and I went back on Facebook for about, for a time. I'm like, no, screw this. So it sounds kind of, I think that just challenges the narrative that says that, yeah, like, we have to do this through social media. I'm not saying there's nothing to that. I think there is. That's a lot of my own personal kind of like just distaste for it. But the idea that like that's your website and your social media presence is what's going to be what bring people in. That's not a sustainable way of going forward. So yeah, a good point.
Brian, you have a question about attracting people?
Yes, I'd be interested in the collective experience as to whether it's a plant or an effort to preserve and stabilize a small existing church. What, in your experience, attracts people to a church and sustains them in wanting to belong to it and spiritual growth? What thing or things do you think are the most effective to do that?
I think in my experience, just what I've seen, it's when there is, again, a pastor who has a sort of, each case that I've seen, there's a combination of a teaching kind of gift and then some sort of hospitality gift. So that if there's a pastor, so even if it's a small group of people, can be teaching people, instructing them, directing them in a way that's compelling, a way that says, well, it doesn't matter if there's not 50 people here, if there's just one other person here, there's meat here. And then again, that combined with a hospitality environment, which says, I think we want to be thinking more so, move away from thinking, what's the thing that we have to do, to more so thinking about, well, how do we do whatever it is that we're going to do? Because I think that underlying question of how we do things is much more important than the particular thing of what we end up doing. So again, I think this starts from the priest cultivating hospitality, kind of flowing out from him, and then cultivating that sort of group, so that, again, if someone comes, like, it doesn't matter that there's only 2 people here, because this was still a loving and a good place to be. So just my experience. I don't know what other people think.
But Father Kevin, one thing you mentioned in passing is something I've heard a number of other people, including your bishop, say from their own experience, which is, I think the term you used was pursuer of people. What does that look like? Because it does feel like it's not just a heart for people. People come to you, that you show that you have a heart for them, but it also seems like it's as you alluded to, an outward orientation to want to meet and to talk to people or find the people who you might be able to serve.
Yeah, I think this looks, we want to kind of stay away from, and I say this probably somewhat reactionary, because I felt like this was a personal struggle of mine, where I felt like church planting might not be a thing for me, because I had in my mind this like super extroverted, gregarious individual sort of a thing, which I never identified as. So all that to say that I think, yeah, according to individual personality, this is going to look different. But again, you're right. It's more than a heart for people, but it's in the heart then that leads you then to connect, to want to start and maintain relationships with people. So for me, I'm more of a kind of like one-on-one guy. I would much rather, those sorts of things I just feel better at. It's where I feel more at home. So for me, it's just simply like inviting people. If someone's new, I always like just ask them if they want to get together for a cup of coffee, and I just try to listen to them. and provide that space. But I think that could look different for other people. I think other people are better than me initially at making someone just feel welcome. I think people are better than me at that. They have more of a kind of interpersonal gift of just like, oh yeah, this person's great, and he made me feel welcome, and maybe a little bit more extroverted. So again, I think it's just going to look different, but it is that just kind of you have a heart for people, and you actually want to, in your own way, start and maintain relationships.
May I follow up on that just really quickly? So with those comments, where do things other than the Sunday morning church service and coffee hour come in? Small groups, things like that. How do you see that fitting in?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's especially in the process of starting when you don't even have a Sunday morning service. I think that sort of thing is much more important. Small group, midweek gatherings, again, just a priest being able to meet one-on-one with an individual. So yeah, I think those are all absolutely essential. You know.
If I could say something here.
We have a couple more questions. So
Okay,
Father,
sure.
yeah. So Father Placer is observing that it is possible. Father Kevin, you had mentioned that the people ought to be planning the church for the right reasons, and that often that's not true in his experience. So if you're on the other side of the table, if you're, say, on the diocesan church planning committee or the advisor to the bishop, what sort of questions or what sort of things would you look for to understand whether or not this particular core group is really wants to, serve the community and do something, make a new church that's going to advance the kingdom of God rather than something that will be convenient for them to attend on Sunday morning?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think you kind of said it. And I don't know, maybe so you're saying if I'm on the other side of the table, if, a bishop or a diocese or whatever looking to support this, I mean, you just have to talk to people and you have to hear where they're at. I find that oftentimes it becomes pretty obvious pretty quickly. Here's a group of, Episcopalians who are still really upset, and I don't downplay that. I think they have every right to be upset about what happened. But I think for maybe a group of Episcopalians who are upset and they just because they just don't want the experience that they had before. Again, I see that more as like a pastoral situation where, maybe a priest should meet with them and kind of like help them work through then the pain of what they had to go through. But I don't see that like at that point in time being necessarily a call then to start another church. So I guess the simple answer to that is just the discernment, the being willing to sit down and ask and, have the gift to be able to do that, I guess. I don't know if that's getting at the answer at all.
Well, to follow up on your point, then, have you ever been in a situation where you were sent somebody who was one of those angry people who wanted something different, and were you able to work with them to help them change their orientation, or were they always kind of wanting to show up for the wrong reason?
Yeah, I mean, there was a group, a couple that I met with them a lot and tried to talk to them, but yeah, just in the end, it didn't end up working out, and they decided to leave. And then I've also been in situations like that where, I feel like people were able to, through the course of time, they may be able to soften a little bit and find a place in that group. So yeah. Sorry, I don't know if that answers the question.
Father Placer, did you have a follow-up?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. I'm speaking to the diocesan side of this more. I think in the past, there was too much of a rush to do a church plant.
Right.
Without really discerning whether the people who are asking for this are really the right kind of people to do it. Especially when we're dealing with people, if they're coming out of the Episcopal Church, they have a lot of anger, and probably justifiably so, but that doesn't make them the right candidates to do this kind of work. Now, there is a possibility they could change, But if a diocesan committee is planning to invest money in a group of people, they really need to take the time to determine whether these are the right kind of people who should be doing this kind of work, and not fail to do that and then not tell the priests the true condition that these people represent in terms of church planting. And then the priest has to discover that most of these people are really not suitable and they have a different motivation. In many cases, they just want to have their own little group, their own little preservation society. And the result is the church plant goes nowhere and the diocese invests a lot of money in something that probably should not have started.
Yeah.
Now,
Thank you.
I've had
Thank
this
you.
experience with the Reformed Episcopal Church and the APA, and I think that in both cases, the committees just need to do a better job in this area.
Thank you. Thank you. That's an important issue, which hopefully we can avoid. We have another question in the chat, and let me just paraphrase it in the interest of time. So, Father Kevin, there are people, these angry ex-Episcopalians. The ACNA was formed with a lot of replants, as was the Continuing Church in the 70s. If you were, say, mentoring somebody who was the priest leading one of these replants, let's say the group left from an existing church, but they didn't bring their priest. They had a new priest that was trying to launch a church with this nucleus of former parishioners who were angry about how they were treated. What would you advise them to do to maybe try to address these issues that we've been talking about people having the wrong motives or just being satisfied with just doing something that would meet their own needs without necessarily reaching out to the community? Well, anything you can think of that you would suggest to the priest who is in that situation?
Yeah, it's going to sound simple and not all that, I don't know, profound, but I'd say just be willing to listen to them, hear their story, try to pastor them through that, and not try. You can't force it. You can't force a new orientation on somebody. And these things, this is just like with all of us, with all of our emotional baggage for whatever it is, it takes time and prayer. And so I think a lot of it, the best that the priest can do is just kind of be a patient and loving presence to them. But on that note too, that's why I think depending on where it's at, and I've done this before, sometimes in a loving way, it might be best to say, hey, maybe we should, check back in with us in a year. Like, I think a priest needs to not necessarily feel bad if they feel like, okay, maybe this just isn't the right place for them right now. I think a priest needs to feel, and again, in a loving way, or maybe then there's just, because as the plant is developing, there might be certain events that maybe they come to, like the shared gathering, but maybe they're a shared gathering for like a worship sort of a thing, if it's evening prayer or whatever it might be. But maybe when there's more kind of core group discussions, maybe they're not necessarily invited to that. And again, that's not trying to say, I'm not trying to sound bad with that, like, oh, we're excluding them. I think it is just something that the priest needs to make sure that he kind of protects then the kind of the core nucleus in a particular way. But I'm afraid that the way that this is coming out is just sounding bad and cruel.
Well, but I think what you're saying then is that you would at least would want to think twice or three times, to Father Placer's point, about whether to actually launch a church if that was the only thing you had in your core group.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, and if it were me, and this is what I did, for example, with one couple, and if it were me, I would more so say to this couple, or if it's a couple of couples, like, I'm willing to meet with you, you know what I mean? And I would meet with them in whatever way and be a pastoral presence for them. So it's not like I'm just saying we just completely abandon them, but maybe they wouldn't form part of the new kind of forming group then for that church plant. They might be better to come once it's a little bit further along.
Right, I would agree with that. I would agree with your
Questions?
position.
Yes, thank you, Father. We have a final, we're kind of at time, but I do want to ask the final question from Father Matt, which was, suppose we had a church that had been a small church and has dwindled down almost to nothingness, and you have a building, a location, and a few people, and a website, and that's about all you have, how much of what you've talked about would be applicable, and how much of it would require maybe a different skill set or a different approach? Do you have a sense of, looking at the framework you provided, about which would be adapted and maybe which would have to be done differently?
Yeah, so I think there's similarities in the sense that the kind of the priest who has a vision then for something new, who prays and fasts to kind of start a core group of people that he could invite into. So it might be just within that existing church, it might be like a separate group almost. And so we're still there and we're present for maybe the small group that's remaining. But in that sense, I could see it going somewhat similarly, or at least with the same kind of guiding principles and basic general steps. I could see that. I also think sometimes it sounds harsh. Sometimes it's simply easier to just put a church to rest and start something brand new. It sounds harsh, but I think and again, obviously that's a bigger decision than just an individual priest needs to talk to his bishop and, pray a lot about that. But I just think sometimes the amount of baggage in a particular church can just make it. That's the one benefit. Maybe I should have said this too. It's like church planting is hard, but the good part about church planting is you can start something new. And a lot of times you can start something new. There is no baggage and you can make it exactly, you know what I mean? You don't have all of the spiders in the closets, as it were. So anyway. Yeah.
Thank you, Father Kevin. Thank you all for attending. We really appreciate it. And we promised it would be an hour, and so we're at the end of our time, but we'll go ahead and wrap it up here. We'll put the slides up on the website. We'll make the video available from the website for people who weren't able to attend. And please fill out the survey to help us decide where we should go next. Thank you all.
I just want to say, just real quick, I just want to say, if anyone has any more questions they want to ask me, I really don't consider myself an expert. It's just sharing my experience having done this, but please feel free to reach out if you wanted to talk about anything else. So
thank you all.
thank you.